You don't even press any buttons. You just move. And it was smash hit. And I saw a tweet once. I think this was, what was this for? Somebody made a tweet where, oh, gamers expect too much these days. And the reply was just a screenshot of Vampire Survivors. Like, this is the expectation.
I mean,
I'm trying to think of if spending this much money, like, do we need to spend this much money on like pretty graphic, like like all the big people?
I don't
Sony,
think
Microsoft,
we need to. But here's the thing: is that used to be the predominant strategy to almost ensure a hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was just to spend the most money and have the best graphics and whatever. And that playbook worked for a really long time. It's not really working anymore. But again, like I was saying, the studio's idea of being risk averse is to still run these playbooks that used to be good, right? And the problem is, let's say even you're there and you realize this isn't the right play anymore. You still need to come up with a play that will work and like suddenly be creative and have much more joy in your heart than you currently do is a very difficult demand, right?
Yeah.
But then also there's a business angle, which is the following. So a big company like Ubisoft or Electronic Arts or whatever is not just trying to make games, right? They're trying to make games at a certain budget level. Why are they trying to do things at a certain budget level? Because over time, they've evolved into machines that deploy a certain amount of capital to get a certain amount of profit, right? So like, if you have $100 and well, it's probably hard to invest $100, right? But let's pick a bigger number like $10,000, right? You could probably find some ways to invest that in a business and make 10% with a reasonable degree of success and beat the market and all that stuff, right? When you have $2 billion, your options for investing that money are way less, right? Because there's not, especially if you want surefire, secure things, there's not as many things, right? You're maybe going to one of these very large venture capital funds or something, or maybe you're going to a company like Electronic Arts and saying, hey, here's a fraction of my $2 billion. Please use this to make your, next, do their sports games still make money? I don't know. One of those, right? Relatively, you can set the clock to whatever year it would be when like FIFA was a guaranteed profit maker or something. If it isn't, I don't follow these. So you would do that, and that would be one of the ways that you knew how to employ that degree of capital. But the entire company is geared around that, right? So if you know how to make games for $600 million, let's say, and you return some fraction of that in profit, and that's at least kind of reliable, you're not going to want to do anything for like $5 million. That's 1% of like the budget that you are geared up to deploy, right? But $5 million is a huge amount for an indie developer for most of them, right? And so they're just very separate universes at that point, all of a sudden.
Do we think that, and this is a question I've been thinking about for a little bit now, like if the consumer can do anything to kind of help push, to kind of help get the larger, like the top portion, like all the AAA and stuff like that, kind of back on track, because I do think that they drove straight off the road a little bit rather than trying to hang on.
To bring that last point all the way home, to connect it to your previous question and also this one, I think. So my point behind making that 600 million versus 5 million thing is just that if you're geared up for $600 million, but the solution to your problems is this is not a viable budget level for games anymore, right? You need to be $60 million instead of 600 or something, which may be true. That might be the fact that we are faced with right now. That looks like dismal failure to your company, because all of a sudden you either have to make 10 times as many games as you're currently set up to make, which is basically impossible. Because like for the same reason you said you can't add more people and get the same amount of efficiency, if a team is making something at a certain scale, those people are geared toward contributions at that scale. If you break that into 10 teams, you're asking for bigger contributions from everybody, but that's not what they're hired for, and that's not what you train them for, and that's not what they're ready to do, right? And so that doesn't really work. And so you would be looking at like, well, our company just has cash flow that's, 3 times or 5 times or 10 times less than it used to be, which is like horrible. Any business owner looking at that would be like, oh my God, we're cratering straight into the ground. So I would expect them to resist that as much as possible.
Yeah.
And try other things, is my point. Is like, even if that's really the truth, is your budgets have to get really much lower, they will resist that very hard, I think.
I think their expectation, especially with what we've seen, like Sony, I guess, had canceled internally several games that they had lined up as games as a service, forever games. I think a huge problem, like we're talking about money, is the perception that whatever you do, that you can have all the money, even though there's only a finite amount, like on the planet. But I think a lot of these companies go in thinking that there's always going to be more pie, and that's not necessarily the case. It's just that pie still has to get split among everybody. And you're constantly fighting with other developers, to try to put out your product against theirs, this, that, and the other. You're always trying to grab this. And I don't think that's feasible anymore. I don't think that, and I know what you're saying when it comes to, and I don't know what the solution is either, when it comes to trimming down budgets, you're not going to be making as much. You'd have to pump out more games, this, that, and the other. And I think, is hubris the right word? Just this, the way they think of themselves and carry themselves, and especially with the way they present games that they make to the consumer, I think tells a lot about the kind of people that they are. And I don't think it's necessarily, obviously, the developers that are making it, but it's all the people that are making the decisions on a game. And there's been plenty of games that come out, especially last year, where I'm like, this wouldn't be such a controversial topic, and this wouldn't be such a controversial thing that you're putting in your video game had you just presented it to the player in a better way. But because of the way you presented it to the player, I understand you don't like the player. Yeah. And you probably loathe them by putting this conversation in a game and doing the things that you're doing. And I see that. I don't think that AAA companies are going to be willing to accept that they do need to make changes moving forward if they want to continue to be successful, and they also have to adjust expectations.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fundamental attitude shift that needs to happen. And so for a long time, this is one of the ways that I've thought about what I do and what a lot of other indies do as opposed to AAA. Because we know these companies, they've just been trying to make money for a long time, right? That's been their primary purpose. Mm-hmm. But they had enough like legacy game designs to operate on, and still enough people on their staff who really liked games, that the games would still come out okay a lot of the time, right? Even if the purpose of the company was just to be a machine that makes money. Mm-hmm. But, especially once the microtransactions era started, that started getting even more corrupted. And, there's sort of this question about what is your relationship to the player? Like, which way does the flow of energy go, or the whatever, right? So when I am making a game, it's very clear to me that I'm trying to make something good for the people who will like this game, which may not be everybody, right? I mean, I'm making a puzzle game right now, so not everybody likes puzzle games, right? But for the people that I'm making it for, I'm trying to make the absolute best thing for them. And man, I work really hard for that. In return, I am very happy to take their money for that, especially now, because I've spent so much on this project, right? But I want them to be happy about it, right? I want them to feel like the game was worth that much, and they're not grudgingly paying it. It's like, I want to give them a good enough experience that they feel like this was really worth it, And there's a different thing going on in AAA, maybe even some indies, right? Because some people are very cynical, but it's just like treating the player as a resource to extract from mainly. And then, I'm giving you a game, but the game is like just enough of an excuse to try to find the places to pull the money. And I'm going to try to like play on your addictive psychology or whatever to try to help that. And it's a very cynical, mechanistic, exploitative way to design. And I really don't like that. And I've gotten some other game industry people really mad at me in the past when I would just call out their entire, shtick as being fundamentally exploitative. you know, I think some of the earliest games that were most blatantly this way were like the Farmville kind of games or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But really, I don't know. There's been lots of culprits. But to me, that's the dividing line, is like, what is the developer really trying to do? What is their attitude? Do they really want the best for their player, or does it go the other direction? And I think with most games, you can draw a pretty clear dividing line between those two categories. And I'm very happy if people stop buying the exploitative games completely. Yeah. I think that's fine.
Yeah, I wish. No, 100%.
No, they will. I mean,
totally
they have
agree,
big budgets and whatever. So
no, I totally agree.